Hi, I'm Jerry Kroll, and this is Legal Las Vegas, where we pull back the curtain on the mystery of what goes on behind those courtroom doors. We're here in Las Vegas, Nevada, because this is the gambling capital. But the reality is that courtroom trials and casino gambling have something in common. It's called probabilities. What's the probability of rolling a 7 or an 11? What's the probability of getting a jury verdict in a courtroom trial? That's what we talk about here. Because when you walk through those courtroom doors, anything can happen. And sometimes it does. We got the truck, got the Airstream. We're going to hit the road because we're going to talk to the people who really know what goes on. So strap yourself in, get ready, relax. We're going to roll the dice together and take a chance. I brought my Airstream here today to an undisclosed location in the western United States so that we can interview one of the nation's top trial lawyers to get some insight. Our guest today is Tom Mesereau. You probably know his name because he's one of the most famous criminal lawyers in the United States today. He's represented celebrities from Robert Blake to Michael Jackson. And he even donates his time to represent indigent defendants in death penalty cases and has set up a free legal clinic. He is absolutely one of the most interesting lawyers you're going to meet. Welcome, Tom Mesereau.
Thank you, Jerry.
How you doing, Tom?
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for coming. Thank you for having such a nice day to interview you. But I got to ask you this. I'm sure everybody says to you, did you ever think instead of becoming a lawyer, starting like Hair Club for Men?
No, but maybe I should think about it now.
Your presence sort of precedes you. You have such an incredible reputation. And, what we talk about here is really more about the relationship between gambling and trial law. Mm-hmm. Because we talk about probabilities of each case. And for trial lawyers, that's sort of an assessment that we make from time to time. In a criminal law, I'm sure that's something that you do as well. How do you decide, criminal defendant, John Doe, knocks on the door, Mesereau law. How do you decide whether you're going to take the case?
There are a lot of factors that go into that. Number one is, what do I think of the client? I'm not saying I have to like the client a lot, but I would prefer to represent someone I feel some empathy for. I prefer to represent someone I feel I can communicate with. And I also realized there were broader principles at stake, like how justice works or doesn't work, why people are selectively prosecuted based on race, class, economics, lack of education, perceived inferiority by arrogant prosecutors and arrogant police officers. I'm not saying all are like that. The vast majority are pretty honorable, but there are some who are not. So there are many factors that go into whether I'll take a case or not. My current caseload, I have to make a living as well. Even though I do a lot of indigent work, I have to make a living. Many different factors go into it.
So, well, let me ask you the more obvious question. Michael Jackson knocks on your door, okay? Do all those factors come into account, or does it the fact that it's a celebrity make a difference?
Well, that case intrigued me because he was the biggest celebrity in the world, for sure. But I have to tell you that close friends warned me not to take it.
Really? Why is that?
More than any other case. This is the biggest celebrity in the world. The charges are horrific. Mm-hmm. And if you lose it, the rest of your life and career will be defined by that loss. Anywhere you go in the world, people will say, he lost the Michael Jackson case, or worse. And I thought about it and I said, this is what I do. We don't shy away from tough cases. We don't shy away from bad odds. We're criminal defense lawyers. Right. Historically, we have stood against the tide of public opinion, the tide of what's popular and what's not popular. Right. And we've taken risks when we had to for the sake of justice and the sake of our clients. And so I decided I was taking the case no matter what anybody said, and one thing led to another.
Well, you won that case.
We did.
So now you're like a winner. Around the world, people go, he won the Michael Jackson case.
It did bring a lot of positive publicity. As I said before, it could have brought negative if I lost.
Well, let's talk about that,
but it brought a lot of positive publicity.
Exactly. But you made a risk assessment. I mean, when you started the Michael Jackson case, did you say to yourself, oh, I can win this case
10 out of 10 times.
Well, when I first entered the case, I didn't know what to think. I like to think that I walk into a case with a clean slate. I don't care what the newspapers are saying, and I don't even care what the client has said or representatives of the client have said. I want to make up my own mind.
Right.
And I had a number of meetings with Michael Jackson, just he and I talking about the allegations. And it didn't take me very long to say, this guy's innocent. This guy could never do the things they're charging him with doing or accusing him of doing. And that opinion never faltered. I mean, the more I talked to him, the more I got to know him, the more I looked at his career, looked at his value system, looked at the obstacles he'd gone through in life, I just became firmer in my belief that this man would never harm a child.
So was that the deciding factor in deciding to take on that case?
No, I'd already taken the case.
So
The deciding factor, there were many factors. One of them was this guy's being cooked in the press before he even has a chance to speak out.
right.
That's not right. You can't just convict someone in the press, and this was world press. This wasn't just, a couple of local newspapers.
Right.
They're not giving him a fair shake already. They're mocking him. They're mocking his appearance. They're mocking the way he dresses. They're mocking the way he lives. This is awful.
Is that
It was a challenge at the time. And then I got to know him, and I said, wait a second, on top of the fact that this man deserves justice, and a lot of people don't think he does deserve it, but I do. On top of that, I began to say to myself, he can't do the kinds of things he's alleged to have done. I mean, they tried to portray him as a monster. It was ridiculous, utterly ridiculous.
from a decision standpoint? Michael Jackson comes to you to represent him, right?
What happened was his brother Randy, who I'd known for years, called me a number of times and wanted me to defend him.
Okay.
I didn't know Michael. I'd never met him. I'd certainly admired his music and his choreography
Sure.
and his dance and his talent for years.
Yeah.
I'd also admired the fact that I was told on a number of occasions that he did a lot of work for children, children who were disabled, children who had no money to pay their bills,
Yeah.
that he had a rule of whenever he went on a concert anywhere in the world, he would visit a children's hospital. I'd heard some of this off and on through the years. I hadn't focused on it.
Right.
But putting all this together, I just came to the conclusion he deserves justice, he deserves fairness, and I don't think he did this for a second.
So, which raises the next question. I mean, I'm one of the people who, I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I think everybody wants to know, criminal lawyer has a potential client. Do you ask your client those ultimate words? Did you do it? Did you pull the trigger? Did you commit the crime?
I'm asked that all the time, and I'm convinced that I'll be asked that for the rest of my days.
Well,
The
I'm
answer
glad I
is-
could do the obvious.
The answer is, first of all, what is my function? My function is to defend innocent people. My function is also to make this system work in the fairest way possible. And anytime you don't stand up to prosecutors or police or a lot of judges who are unfair, you make it worse for all of us. And every time you do stand up for those principles, you make it fairer for all of us. So our function is to make the system work and to defend innocent people. Sometimes they're guilty of something, but not what they're charged with. I mean, if I give you a slap today and I get charged with attempted murder, that's unfair. If I get charged with misdemeanor assault, that may be fair, okay? So the system is very imperfect. Arbitrary decisions are made by prosecutors or police who don't know who they're talking about or who that person really is. You go into a courtroom, it's an artificial recreation of what happened somewhere, someplace, on another date, and it can't be perfect. You have to follow the rules. You have to be ethical. You have to be professional. You can't break rules in a way that's completely illegal or anything like that, which I would never do. But you have to make the system work, and you have to do it with courage and professionalism and ethics.
Well said, Tom. Question for you.
Yes.
Do you have to satisfy yourself that the client you're going to represent is innocent before you take the case?
No, I don't. And usually when you meet a client, you don't really know what happened. You don't know the case well enough. And unless you take the case, usually you don't know the evidence well enough. So you make a decision whether this is all things considered, who the client is, what the charges are, what you've heard about the case, your values in terms of making the system work properly, particularly for people who are disadvantaged.
Right.
You put all that together and you make a decision. And back to your question, I generally do not ask a client, did you do this? Most clients will tell me I'm not guilty of this, but I
Right.
never ask the question.
So you do handle cases where there's a death penalty involved.
I have done that, yes.
And that's where the stakes are, the ultimate stakes are so high
Yes.
that we're talking life and death.
Yes.
So in those cases, again, risk assessment, because that's what we talk about here. Deciding, do I try to plea bargain? Do I roll the dice with somebody's life? What do you do in that situation?
Well, every case is unique. Every case is different. I mean, there's no case like any other case. That's the way I look at what we do. It's a leap into the unknown at best, every single case.
Yeah.
And people are vilified in the press. Assumptions are made that the prosecutors must have got it right or they wouldn't have brought the charges. And the fact is, usually the prosecutors don't know the client at all. They make a charging decision based on some paperwork they were handed, which very often is not representative of all the facts or all the realities involved. And I've had cases, I had 2 very high profile death penalty cases in Alabama, where in my opinion, the press had completely cooked the clients. I mean, they were vilifying them like you wouldn't believe. One of them was a homeless black man charged with killing a beautiful white girl from a very, very lovely family in Birmingham. And every time there was a court appearance, you saw a black face, you saw a white face on the front page of the Birmingham News. And this poor fellow was cooked before he showed up in the courtroom. I started talking to him about these facts, and I started learning about what his life was like. And I didn't believe for a second he committed this shooting. And yet everybody in town seemed to have basically thrown him on the trash heap. And this was the first case I signed up for in the state of Alabama. And I was working with 2 wonderful lawyers, local lawyers who did death penalty work, wonderful men. And I said to them, look, I don't want to be presumptuous and I don't want to be overly controlling, but how would you approach the case? And we talked about it, and I found out they were taught to tread lightly in their opening statement. Don't go out on limbs. Don't take too many risks, lest you not prove what you said you'd prove or show what you said you'd show.
Right.
And I told them I don't agree with that, that's the way we're all taught in law school. I think unless you grab the emotions at the beginning and take some risks, we're really going to have trouble catching up. And I found out that in Alabama at the time, generally no criminal defense lawyer put their client on the stand. And I said, I talked to this man, and is he articulate? No. Is he troubled? Yes. He's been living on the streets for years, poor nutrition, poor mental health, but something about him rings true. And I convinced them to let us put him on the stand. And if you looked at the transcript, you would have thought he got cut to ribbons. If you looked at it in person and you felt the emotion and looked at his eyes and looked at his expression, you realize this man couldn't possibly commit a crime like this. And he was acquitted.
Wow.
And there was a lot of controversy about it. The poor distraught father of the young lady who was shot, he had to be escorted from the courtroom. People were pointing at me, pointing at my co-counsel. Emotions ran heavy. But I really felt we did the right thing, and I felt he was completely innocent, and he was acquitted by a Birmingham jury.
But it's a risk, though. I mean, you could gamble and be wrong.
It may be a risk not doing it, which most of my colleagues don't consider. Right.
In other words, it's kind of like, in this show we talk about rolling the dice. It's a roll of the dice, but the numbers aren't that, the probabilities may be better than you think.
Well, there are different reasons to put a client on the stand. I have put clients on the stand who were convicted of something, but you knew they weren't good for the ultimate charge, that it was grossly overcharged. Or I've had clients take the stand and they were likable and they were believable, maybe not totally by jurors or judges or whatever, but they got very light sentences because you realize they weren't the bad monster that they were being portrayed as. So there are different reasons to put a client on the stand, but sometimes you say to yourself, I'm not confident this is going to be a not guilty. I'm not confident the jury is okay without hearing from the client, even though they know he's pleaded not guilty or she's pleaded not guilty. And sometimes I say, look, they need to see who the person is. They need to know where the person came from. They need to know what experiences and obstacles this person has faced. And then the jury needs to know that everybody gets treated equally. Poor, rich, educated, uneducated, disadvantaged, advantaged, you name it.
So if I was to say to you, well, I'm going to ask you, what's the biggest gamble you've ever taken on a criminal case?
Biggest gamble I've ever taken. I think every case is different. So every case is a gamble from start to finish. You walk into a courtroom, there's never going to be a case like that again. You have a certain chemistry and interaction between judges, witnesses, defendants, plaintiffs or prosecution, jurors, bailiffs. Whoever is in that courtroom is interacting in a certain way, and it's never happened before, and it's never going to happen again. You pick jurors. You don't really know them.
Mm-hmm.
You operate on experience, feel, intuition, objective data. Do you really know the person? No, maybe they don't know themselves very well either. So you take a gamble in terms of how you approach jury selection, who you remove, who you don't remove, what you think the other side will do. Always a gamble.
Wow.
But I'll answer your. I mean, I can go further into the trial, but let me answer your question in terms of jury selection. The Michael Jackson case.
Sure.
I had a jury consultant. I didn't agree with the consultant's findings. I was told that women were not good for Michael Jackson with these horrible allegations, particularly mothers. And I decided I wanted women and I wanted mothers. And the question was directed to me at the time and later on, why did you do that? And I said to myself, well, I know the case better than almost anybody else. I know the client better than anyone else. Now, this is a client who dances to a different drummer, who dresses very differently,
Right.
whose sexuality is being attacked by the prosecution directly and indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
And I have found women less harshly judgmental of eccentric males, males whose sexuality is being either attacked or questioned in a very malevolent way by prosecutors. I felt that women would be less judgmental of his eccentric ways, his eccentric way of dressing, as opposed to heterosexual men. Of course, gay men or gay women, I would find less judgmental of him in that respect,
Right.
or expect to be less judgmental than heterosexual men. But I really wanted women to understand who he was, his creativity, his humanity, his sensitivity.
Fascinating.
And I also, the more I got to know him, I felt he not only brings people together in his personal life, in his music, he takes races and he brings them together and heals everybody. So a lot of people were telling me, you want to get an African-American on the jury. He comes from a prominent African-American family. And my feeling was, I don't need to. And a black woman appeared on the panel, and the prosecutors immediately removed her, and I made constitutional objections that were denied. Another black woman appeared. The prosecutors immediately removed her, and I made constitutional objections which were denied. There was a young black man coming up through the alternate ranks that if I used a lot of my challenges, I could possibly get on the panel.
Right.
And I saw the prosecutors accepting the panel, accepting the panel, accepting the panel, banking their challenges, waiting for me to exhaust mine in order to get the African-American fellow on the jury.
Right.
And with more than half my challenges remaining, I accepted the panel with that one African-American on it. It was a majority of women, and we got acquittals on every count, felonies and misdemeanors.
Wow. Gamble, but you won the gamble.
Did win
I
that
mean,
one.
that was a very interesting analysis. And you went against, see, what's interesting is that you had a jury consultant whose job it is
Yes.
to give you the advice.
Well, she got data.
Yeah.
And the data was interesting because I'd never tried a case in that county before. That's in Santa Barbara County, north of Los Angeles County.
Right.
And this was northern Santa Barbara County, which is different from other parts of Santa Barbara County. So I wanted a lot of data. And as you know, jury consultants will get information, data.
Yeah.
They will correlate it with age, race, gender, occupation,
Right.
political affiliation, you name a part of town, and try to come up with a composite ultimate prosecution juror and a composite ultimate defense juror. But it's data driven. It's not driven by intuition. It's not driven by experience that you've had with your trials. At least I don't think so.
Well, it's interesting because if you go into a jury selection where you have this data, you're going like predisposed to look for a particular juror that meets the criteria. But what you're saying is you're going in there and you're using this, that you're using your instincts as well.
You use everything you have as a human being. You use your intuition, you use your experience, you use your instincts, you use your feel, and you use your intellect. You use what your understanding of what the data shows, and you try to figure out, given the constraints involved in jury selection, and let's face it, it's more deselection than it is selection.
Yeah.
It's more removing the bad apples than it is choosing the ones you like.
But it's fascinating though, because I think most people, I mean, it's what you're telling us now, no one knows, okay, that this is what happened in the Michael Jackson trial, which is fascinating because you made a decision, and some would call it a gamble, but you decided that the probabilities of getting an acquittal would be better if you had female jurors that fit the
Yes.
criteria you're talking about.
Yes.
Fascinating, Tom. Just fascinating. What, I mean, would you say in terms of cases where you've had things just fall out of the sky, unexpected things happen? Has that ever happened to you in a criminal trial?
Well, it's funny, when you ask a question like that, you remind me of my 1 year as a prosecutor, which was a dreadful year. I didn't like being a prosecutor. I didn't fit in. I knew it right away.
Right.
But I tried a juvenile criminal trial where I was prosecuting a young teenager for escaping from a juvenile detention facility. He had escaped and been caught, and they were charging him with a felony escape. And he took the stand and talked about all the abuse in the facility, all the horrible things that had been done to him. And I cross-examined him, and I made it even more apparent that he'd been abused. I said, well, you talked about they're abusing you this way, but they also did this, right? And they also did this, right? And they also did this, didn't they? And he said, yes, and that's why I escaped.
It's not funny, I guess, but maybe it is funny. I mean, that's like, yeah, I pulled the trigger, kind of, It's like, because I have to tell you, sometimes, we, the public, we watch TV, and there is a view of criminal defense lawyers that are like, it's like Matlock, Perry Mason. You can name all the different stereotypes, okay? But, I mean, you had this one experience.
Well, that's something I've just never forgotten.
All these years.
It just, and people in the courtroom were actually laughing over what happened. It wasn't funny, as you pointed out, really, but you asked what was unexpected.
Yeah,
what was unexpected was him admitting to the crime.
That's amazing, though. It's
Because he was so upset.
Right, but I mean, on your part, I mean, I knowing you, the little that I know of you is that you would be conflicted personally because you would feel the poor guy is being abused. At the same time, you broke the law.
I couldn't stand being a prosecutor. When I first showed up to be a prosecutor, we had a training program.
Yeah.
I was at this juvenile facility. We went on a tour. I was shown a room with an iron door, shut, locked. There was a window. There was a little girl sitting alone on the floor with her head in her hands.
Oh, boy.
And I said, who is that? And they said, this is Suicide Watch. And then I was given a set of files to prosecute, and she was the first trial I ever did. And she had been arrested for stealing something from a department store. She had confessed to it. It was a dead bang case. Nobody could lose it.
Right.
The first thing she did when she got to juvenile hall was look for typewriter fluid to sniff because she was a drug addict. She'd been abused physically, sexually. I mean, the little child, I really wanted to give her a hug and get her treatment. I didn't want to prosecute her.
Of course.
And I actually complained about it, and I was told I had to. And I did prosecute her. She was obviously convicted. Yeah. And I said to myself, I'm not meant to be a prosecutor. I can't stand this.
Wow. It's fascinating what you have to go through in your cases because, you're dealing with potentially life and death, and you don't know what you're going to get. This is like Forrest Gump. I mean, you're pulling out a box of chocolates. You're pulling out a bunch of witnesses, and you don't know.
Well, I remember in the Michael Jackson case, the prosecution called a witness. She would talk and talk and talk. The prosecutor would look at me, waiting for me to object and strike the testimony, and I just kept my mouth shut because the more she talked, the more she buried herself. And finally, the prosecutor started objecting to his own witness. Your Honor, a non-responsive moved to strike. And he looked even worse when he did that.
Oh, my gosh. Tom, I know you've had a lot of famous cases with celebrities. I know one of them is Robert Blake.
Yes.
What happened there that was kind of unusual?
We had a preliminary hearing. Robert was charged with murder with special circumstances, which could have involved the death penalty if the prosecutors had asked for it. But at the time, they hadn't made a decision yet. No one in California had ever gotten bail in a murder with special circumstances case. In fact, the prosecutors thought by statute you couldn't. We had a preliminary hearing, which is in front of a judge, not a jury, where the prosecutors have to put on enough evidence to establish reasonable a reasonable suspicion that a crime occurred, also called probable cause. And they thought it was going to be about 3 days. I turned the preliminary hearing into a couple of weeks.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it was almost like a trial.
Wow.
And at the end of the preliminary hearing, the judge agreed to give Mr. Blake bail. And all of these other lawyers had told him you can't get bond. Retired judges had told him you can't get bond. He did it on national TV, and that's what gave me a national reputation. I had a local reputation at the time, but not a national one. And it was a big
Wow.
day. I went down to county jail. There were media everywhere.
Yeah.
Cameras, helicopters, and was there when he was released from
Wow.
county jail. And then we were followed everywhere driving.
It's unheard
Yeah.
of, though, what you did.
It was a big event for me.
Good for
And
you.
a big event for him, obviously.
So for you, that was the ship that launched 1,000 ships.
It gave me a national reputation because Court TV televised that preliminary hearing. And going into the televised hearing,
Right.
80+% of their viewers thought he was guilty. And after the preliminary hearing took place, 80+% thought he was not guilty. So it had a lot to do with changing public opinion
Wow.
about, whether Mr. Blake was culpable or not.
It's amazing. Amazing you got to do that.
It was a big event for me. I'll say that.
Wow.
And
My gosh.
I've always told people anything can happen in a criminal case.
Can't take my lines. Okay. Because one of our mantras of the show is you walk through those courtroom doors, anything can happen. And you sure said it.
Well, I think we have to be psychologists as best we can. We're always walking into the unknown. We're
Yeah.
always, we're in a room where we can't see everything that's going on, but we're doing our best to feel our way through. And how you approach a case has a lot to do with psychology as much as it does with what you've been taught in law school or what you've been taught as a lawyer. Most of we lawyers have been taught, be very careful what you say in opening statement. And I said to myself, because basically what they're saying is, if you don't prove everything you say you're going to prove or show everything you're going to show in opening statement, they're going to throw it at you at the end.
Right.
Well, how often do prosecutors bring 10 counts, tell a jury, I'll prove all these counts beyond a reasonable doubt, and they don't prove all of them? Are they penalized for not proving all of them? I don't think so. So
Right.
what makes you think that if your priorities change, if the circumstances change, you don't call every witness you thought you were going to call, does that necessarily mean it's going to be fatal?
Yeah.
And the jury's going to hold it against you? Not necessarily at all. I don't think so.
Really interesting take on that. I mean, you're making a great point. And it's a question of having the courage to do that.
Well, you have to be ethical. You have to have a good faith basis for what you say you're going to do or
Right.
show or prove.
Right.
And I also came to the conclusion years ago, because we have a system where to convict someone of a crime, you've got to prove each element of the alleged crime beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
I think defense attorneys hide behind reasonable doubt in their opening statement too often. I generally
Interesting.
don't mention the burden of proof, and I don't mention reasonable doubt. And I don't mention presumption of innocence. I mentioned basically what we're going to show, what we're going to prove. I want jurors to know the truth's on our side, and we're not afraid to show it.
See, but that takes courage.
A lot of people think I'm crazy, but
Well,
what I-
you know what? I mean, I'm not going to comment. I would say that if you're crazy like a fox. As my mother used to say. All I can say is, listening to you is so motivating and refreshing.
well, thank
And
you.
all I can tell you is that if people could have you for their criminal defense lawyer, they're blessed.
Well, thank you very much.
You know,
Appreciate it.
and I'm so grateful that you could join us today. And
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
kidding, it's the best. I hope you'll come back again too, Tom.
Thank you, Jerry.
Okay?
Appreciate
Thank
it
you
very
so
much.
much, really.
Thank you.